right now we're hip deep in what is a serious question for the future of America, and that is who will lead the Democratic Party and who will lead this nation for the next 4 years. And there are significant questions as to the mental acuity of Joe Biden, and there are now significant questions given his horrendous debate, again, with air quotes, performance on that Thursday night. There are significant questions as to whether or not he will remain in the Democratic race. It looks as though with increasing pressure, he may have no choice but to pull out. We will now find out from someone who is a brilliant presidential historian and lecturer, author, and former KGO talk show host. Here's John Rothmann, everybody. Hi, John.
Hi, Mark.
And tell me where you are. Where are you on this, sir?
Well, we will never erase from our memories Joe Biden in the joint appearance with Donald Trump. It was a disaster for Joe Biden, and everybody understands it was a disaster. And the question now is, what will Joe Biden do? Joe Biden is not a quitter, but I would remind you he has to face political reality. It is clear to me that most Americans, Democrats and Republicans, now view Joe Biden as not being up for another 4 years as president. He'll finish his term, okay. The Democrats will have to nominate another candidate, despite the fact that Bill Maher is calling for the nomination of Gavin Newsom. It is clear to me that the next nominee of the Democratic Party will be Kamala Harris. I think there's little doubt about it. There's no way in my mind that the party would repudiate Kamala Harris. It also has to do with a fundraising issue because money has been raised for the Biden-Harris campaign, and certainly that includes Kamala Harris. It is a tragedy for Joe Biden, but 81 years old can be a vigorous time, or it can be a time when you slow down. And it's clear that Joe Biden is not up for another 4 years as president. Please note I said not up for another 4 years. He can finish out his term. He can finish it honorably, but it's clear that it's over.
So then in the implied narrative that you're talking about, he would not step down as president. He would simply release his delegates to Kamala Harris?
Yes, that's right.
And how does that work exactly? In other words, would that happen at the convention or?
No, who knows? But those delegates are legally pledged to Joe Biden. They have to vote for him. Not all of them, but most of them have to vote for him, enough to secure the nomination. And he would have to release those delegates. And then he would have to make an endorsement. I think he would not allow for an open convention. That would not be in the interests of the Biden-Harris administration. It is Biden-Harris. Harris is the designated heir apparent, and it would seem to me to be very logical. That would give Joe Biden, by the way, a chance to continue to be active in the campaign. He could campaign all over the country for Kamala Harris if he's up for it. Then the next question is, who does Kamala Harris take as her running mate? And that will also be an interesting question, which no one is really considering yet. Everyone is focused on Donald Trump's potential VP pick, which will come shortly. He has to. Well,
that's the reason no one's talking about it is like 4 steps ahead. But I would also say to you, John, before I get to that, the 4 steps ahead, I'll take you back to the first step. So you're saying he'll release the delegates to Kamala Harris. So essentially others who would lobby for, and this is not a small number of people, okay? Don't discount this group within the Democratic Party who already feel as though the Democratic Party gaslit them about Joe Biden's condition. They would want an actual discussion as to who will succeed top of ticket.
There may be a discussion.
I agree with you, which is that war chest, and I made this point in the first hour, is significant, and only Harris has it. But
there may be a discussion, Mark, but there is no other candidate for the Democratic Party than the sitting vice president of the United States. And you will note that Joe Biden refers to her constantly as his partner. And it is inconceivable to me that the Democratic Party could pass over Kamala Harris. She's been vice president for the last 3.5 years. She is a woman of color. She is a woman, obviously. And she has tremendous constituency. If you notice the polls today, they show her running even with Donald Trump. So in my mind, it's a very clear situation. for Joe Biden, and this is the thing people don't grasp, it's hard to concede that you can't continue. It's hard to agree to step down. We've seen that with our own colleagues in media. People, once you concede your age, you can't take it back. And that's the problem Joe Biden has. It's dealing with his own mortality.
Kim?
If the Democrats are going to stick with Kamala Harris, which you say they have to, wouldn't it make more sense for President Biden to step aside now and give her 5 months to be
that's what he's going to do.
So
if he's going to do it, it will come quickly.
So
He
she'll
cannot
have
continue.
5 months to show what she can do, right? And she goes into the Democratic National Convention, or she goes into the campaign, an incumbent president. So you give her a leg up.
No, she goes into the campaign as the vice president, who is the designated nominee of the Democratic Party and who would succeed to the presidency if she wins.
No, but what I'm saying is, if he steps down right now and she becomes the president,
No, not stepping down from the presidency. He's not stepping down.
Right, but Kim's
that's what
making
I'm
the
saying.
argument for him stepping down.
I'm making the argument that he should, if this is going to happen, if all this is going to play out, and she will eventually be the nominee, doesn't it make sense for her to be the incumbent? That way she goes into it having a few months as being president under her belt, and she goes in to the campaign as an incumbent president. Wouldn't that make sense?
Kim, but I do not think Joe Biden wants to be the second president in American history to resign his office.
I'm with brother Rothmann on this one. I think it may make sense to you, Kim, and it may make sense to others. And I mean, it's not nonsensical at all. It just feels as though it would create other problems. For example, all of a sudden the burden of governance, it's not always power of incumbency, it's the incumbency comes as an encumbrance as well. So now the issues of the world come to Kamala Harris while she's trying to play catch up in a game that she just got in. This race, hasn't really included her as top of ticket. I'm with Brother Rothmann on this. I really think you got to let.
You don't understand. Nobody can predict the future. I was in Wisconsin on March 31st, 1968. I had been with Richard Nixon that morning in Milwaukee. He was campaigning, he and his wife and David and Eisenhower and Julie and Tricia, they were all there. Who could have imagined that evening that Lyndon Johnson would withdraw as a candidate for president? So I can't read tea leaves. I can only tell you the reality. There is unrest within the Democratic Party. They understand the fallibility of Joe Biden. They understand that whatever happens, they have to run on his record for 3.5 years. The exemplar of that record is Kamala Harris. So she becomes the heir apparent. And it still gives Joe Biden not only a chance to continue as president for the remaining months of his term, but also he can be unleashed in the campaign, if he's up for it, to campaign actively for his vice president. And you will know.
I have two scenarios that I really want you to comment on. One is really fantastical, but I just love it as a scenario, and I wanted to get your thoughts. And it is this. If, and this again, this is not a situation with Joe Biden, but if there is a 25th Amendment intervention in the case of, again, let's forget about Joe Biden now. With now,
there won't be.
John, I know. Forget it. I'll ask another guest. I don't. You won't even let me get the narrative out. Let me ask you. This is from a viewer. Okay, this is from a viewer who has a question for you. Albert, get the goddamn question for him. Get me. Here it is. It's not for me. You answer the question. Jesus.
No, the 25th Amendment would not apply. It would require his cabinet to agree to vote him out. With the question
that would be interesting to me, it's an academic question, sir, is if he were removed, he still technically, even though he was removed as president, could continue to retain those delegates and run for president again, couldn't he?
Yeah, I just don't think it's realistic.
Okay.
His cabinet is not going to vote that he is not capable of running. Let me explain to you that Joe Biden, whatever we think his competence may be, still has full confidence, evidently, in his own ability. He would resist removal, and no one is moving for his removal. The 25th Amendment simply doesn't apply in this case.
Of course not. It was a hypothetical. Okay, so then what are the next steps, sir? What are they? What are we likely to see?
Joe Biden has to announce to the country whether or not he is going to run. If he says he's going to run, the Democratic Party has no choice. They will renominate him. And it's very clear from the response of key Democrats, they're not going to challenge that. If he releases his delegates, I believe he will endorse Kamala Harris, which means that the lead up to the Democratic convention would be to promote Kamala Harris. She then would have to make a choice about who her running mate would be. And believe me, if she is the nominee, she's going to stand on the stage at the Democratic convention and embrace Joe Biden and say, you want 4 more years of the Biden-Harris administration? You've got it. I'm the person. And I'll tell you, I've known Kamala Harris for years. The first radio talk show she ever appeared on was with me. I watched her as district attorney, as attorney general, as a United States Senator. I would love to see her on the same stage with Donald Trump. I think she'd eviscerate him.
Well, of course you would, but I don't know that you're going to see that chance. I really don't.
If she's the nominee, you will.
Really? Do you think? I mean, what?
Well, how are you going to avoid having a debate between the leading Democrat and the leading Republican? Donald Trump doesn't like to be accused of being a chicken. And by the way, the issue here, we're talking about Biden, we should be talking about Trump. His demeanor, the number of lies he told, more than 30 as we count them, and all of his legal problems, the fact that he could be president of the United States scares the living daylights out of me.
Of course.
And you may know that they're now going, some in the Republican Party are going after civil service and saying if you're a Biden partisan, you ought to be fired from the civil service. I have the whole packet of material here. It is, to me, absolutely shocking. And to be blunt, Donald Trump cannot go unchecked. And the Democratic Party, look, why did Joe Biden get into the race? He got into the race to stop Donald Trump from a second term. He succeeded. The argument I would make to him is don't stick around and allow Donald Trump to win the election. Pure and simple.
Well, it's a shame, and you make a point, I think, quite well, that his lies went completely unchecked. It was a fire hose, a fire hose of lies, and yet Joe Biden couldn't pick off one of them. It was embarrassing. I mean, some of the biggest, fattest lies that you could ever imagine, and Joe Biden couldn't pick off any of them.
He was not up to being president. And let me tell you, you cannot erase from the memory of the American people what we witnessed. And I will tell you, if he is the nominee, you can be absolutely certain that the Donald Trump commercials, which are going to run all over the country, will feature that Joe Biden. And so that's something we all have to really think about. I've always been a Biden partisan. I supported him for president each time he ran. He's always been very capable, but it's clear that he is not the Joe Biden that he was 2 years ago, 5 years ago, 20 years ago. And he has to accept that reality.
The vice presidential pick on the Trump team is being put off because Trump's trying to sort of watch this show unfold.
He can't put it off too long. The convention convenes in just 2 weeks. And so Donald Trump will have to make a pick.
And he feels, apparently, some are saying that by putting it off, he can juice essentially ratings for the,
Yes, for the convention. Yeah. Absolutely.
Right, for his convention. So,
and remember, this is not unusual that normally presidential candidates, when they choose a vice president, historically, have waited until after their own formal nomination for president. By the way, there's one other quick thing. You understand that the Democratic convention is a problem because it's so late that in a state like Ohio, Biden, if he is renominated, has to be before the deadline, which is before the convention. So it would not surprise me if the Democratic National Committee has to make the decision of who they're supporting.
I know you love Kamala Harris, and I know that you were the first interview she did, but Delwood, I think, asked a good question because her name is mentioned prominently in these conversations. Governor Gretchen Whitmer, clearly a stronger candidate to defeat Trump. This is, again, his opinion. Do Democrats really want to win? Groupthink still in place to make a bad nomination. I don't think Kamala Harris is a bad nomination. I mean, based on polling, Rothmann even talks about it. The polling polls are even with Trump, but just give me a moment on Gretchen Whitmer for a second, if you would.
Gretchen Whitmer is very capable. Gavin Newsom is very capable. Jay Shapiro, the governor of Pennsylvania, is very capable. There are a number of potential candidates on the Democratic side, but I'm being very pragmatic. When and if Joe Biden releases his delegates, there is no doubt in my mind that that machine, and it is a machine, will back Kamala Harris. They cannot repudiate the individual who has been vice president of the United States, and who, by the way, as I think Kim just pointed out, Kamala Harris is running even in the polls with Donald Trump. So there is no reason why she would not be the Democratic nominee for president.
Agolf is saying, shouldn't the most lies ever told in a presidential debate be a bigger story than the incumbent had jet lag and a cold? I think jet lag and a cold, though, does soft pedal it. I mean, John, when you get John Rothmann, who's a big Biden backer himself, saying, hey, look, the guy was, he was out on his feet. I mean, he really was. He couldn't even... His summation. I mean, when they give you your closing comments, you should have those nailed. I mean, that you should be able to.
You remember Ronald Reagan in the first debate with Walter Mondale. His presentation was a rambling presentation. His summation was terrible, and everybody in the Mondale campaign, and I knew some of the key people in the Mondale campaign, believed that they could beat Ronald Reagan. He came back in the second debate with that one line: "I won't hold my opponent's youth and inexperience against him." And everybody laughed, including Walter Mondale. Look, Joe Biden has a chance to redeem himself, but it's not till after the convention. And I think the clock is ticking on Joe Biden now very carefully. It's not an easy thing to say. Look, nobody wants to admit their own mortality. No one wants to admit, and Joe Biden has a formidable record, whether you agree with him on issues or not. The only person who is part of that record who can stand on a platform and defend it is Kamala Harris. She is the vice president of the United States. And I would remind you that it is almost impossible to displace a vice presidential nominee. We saw it happen in 1944 when Franklin Roosevelt dumped Henry Wallace and took Harry Truman. And by the way, the dumping took place because the Democratic powers that be were worried about the health of Franklin Roosevelt and afraid of a Harry Truman presidency. And it happened again with Gerald Ford when the conservative wing of the Republican Party demanded that Nelson Rockefeller be removed. And Nelson Rockefeller was removed and was replaced with Bob Dole.
There's one candidate.
Vice president is a very tough thing to do.
One candidate that's not a vice president that shellacks Donald Trump, according to the Reuters Ipsos poll, Michelle Obama, author, attorney, and wife of former President Barack Obama, has a double-digit lead over Trump, 50% to 39%. Again, though, she's not going to run, so these are sort of fantastical various...
yeah, and by the way, earlier when you and I were disputing on the 25th Amendment, it's not really a dispute. I just understand the pragmatic situation. Michelle Obama is an unknown quantity in terms of her current political stands. And of course, that is an asset in many ways. But I don't see her as a practical consideration.
Yeah, I think that's indisputable.
That's probably a major media call, but I'm putting it off because there's only one major media personality I want to talk to, and that's
Thank you, my friend. It's a delight to have you in our mix always. This seems like a moment that really requires a presidential historian and someone who is an expert, and you are that guy.
I know you have to wrap this up, but I just want to say a word about Donald Trump. I believe it to be a national imperative that Donald Trump not become president of the United States again. And everything that can be done to make sure that Donald Trump does not sit in the White House has to be done. That should be Joe Biden's primary consideration, and that should be the Democratic Party's primary consideration as they proceed. The prevention of Donald Trump from ever being president again, in the words of Liz Cheney, in the words of other key Republicans who oppose him, is the absolute imperative.
Well, the poisoning of the Supreme Court that has happened, he's really finished
we haven't
it
even
off.
talked about the Supreme Court case.
And the poisoning is, well, because if you would just shut up for a second, I could get to the Supreme Court, but you're always talking. I can't believe you, John Rothmann. That's me calling on the other line saying, quiet, let me get a word in edgewise.
Can I say a word about the Supreme Court?
Oh, my God. What's our situation, Albert? Don't I have Carol waiting?
She is in the green room. We got to wrap up here.
I got to wrap. I'm sorry. I love you. Listen, you got to, you're a talk show host. Plan your time out better next time. All right.
You started me late, Mark. It's all
you're right.
fault.
That is true, to be fair to you. But I also, and I'm finishing you late. John Rothmann podcast is Around the World, Political World with John Rothmann. He really will share thoughts about the Supreme Court there and then back here again next week. Again, it's Around the Political World. We love you, John. John Rothmann, everybody. Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.